We've discussed the concept of well-known ports in our TCP versus UDP video, and I'm going to follow that up with a bit more information here in regard to those well-known ports. So first, let's talk about port ranges. Our well-known port ranges are within the ranges of port number 0 through 1023. This is where we commonly have network services such as DNS, DHCP, HTTP, HTTPS, and more. There's another range for what we call registered ports from 1024 to 49,151. Registered ports are where a vendor or organization will register a protocol with the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, or the IANA. This is where vendors may have a specific port assigned to a protocol they are using. And we also have something called ephemeral ports, also known as dynamic ports or private ports. We've talked about these as well, and they range from 49,152 to 65,535. By the way, the ephemeral ports are not strictly adhered to. You might find a return port in the registered port range depending on the operating system. So if you are doing a packet capture and you do see that, do not be alarmed. But technically speaking, these are how the port ranges are divided up. Now let's talk about some specific well-known ports and protocols that we see within the well-known port range. This list is by no means exhaustive, but these are some of the most common port and protocol combinations that you are likely to see and also that you are likely to leverage on when you are performing ethical hacking and using tools found within Kali Linux. Now, if this is new to you, the best way to memorize some of these ports is through flashcards, whether physical or digital. That's what I would recommend. A flashcard app such as Anki is spelled as ANKI. It is a simple multi-platform flashcard app which is compatible with Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, and even Linux. It lets you make your own flashcards on any device. It's a really great free tool that I've personally used in my own studies to memorize some of these things that you just have to commit to memory. So let's go through some common protocols. First, we have FTP or File Transfer Protocol. This is used to transfer files with a remote host, and that typically requires authentication through user credentials. If you've ever uploaded content to the backend of a website or into a MikroTik router as an example, then you've likely used this. FTP uses TCP ports 20 and 21. 21 is used to establish the connection and 20 is used to transfer data. FTP passes login credentials in clear text, in other words, in an unencrypted format. And so it is considered to be an insecure protocol. The next protocol that we'll talk about here is SSH or Secure Shell. Now, this is a secure protocol. This is going to be used to connect to a host remotely over TCP port 22. You commonly see this used with a terminal emulator to connect to network equipment such as a switch or a router. If you're familiar with the Cisco world, or if you've worked with Cisco equipment, or if you've ever had to order a virtual private server or dedicated server, this is a common way with which we connect to those devices for management. We can also combine FTP and SSH, which gives us secure FTP or SFTP. This is also used over TCP port 22. It's still using FTP, but we're sending that inside of SSH for protection. We also have FTPS, which is FTP secure. So what's the difference here? Well, instead of using SSH as we see with secure FTP to protect our FTP data, we're using either SSL or TLS. SSL stands for Secure Socket Layer. TLS is Transport Layer Security. So we're using one of those two mechanisms to do that. TLS is the more secure version of this, and you see that this uses port 989 and 990. And that can be either TCP or UDP traffic. An older protocol that's similar to SSH is Telnet. This allows us to remotely connect to a host using a terminal emulator. But just like FTP, this is also sent in clear text and is unencrypted. So SSH is the preferred method over Telnet. Telnet uses TCP port 23 for communication. Next, we have SMTP, or Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. SMTP is used for sending email to an email server over TCP port 25. SMTP by itself is not secure, so we ultimately have SMTP over SSL or TLS. This provides either SSL or TLS security for our SMTP traffic. Again, with TLS being a more secure option. This uses TCP port 587. One of the most popular protocols that we use every single day is called DNS, or Domain Name System. This allows us to resolve domain names to IP addresses. So when we're going out to google.com as an example, we communicate with the DNS server, and that's going to translate the domain name of google.com into the corresponding IP address for that web server. That uses port 53, either for TCP or UDP. Another file transfer protocol is TFTP, or Trivial File Transfer Protocol. This is a lightweight version of FTP that doesn't require any user credentials at all. So in other words, there's no authentication. You can download or upload using TFTP over UDP port 69. Next, we have DHCP, another very common protocol. If you do not have a static IP address that's manually set on your laptop or desktop or even your phone, which is likely the case for most users, DHCP is used to try to automatically obtain IP address information, and that includes the IP address itself, the subnet mask, the DNS servers, and the default gateway. And that takes place over UDP port 67. We also have HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. This is how we exchange information with a non-secure web server, and that happens over TCP port 80. Now, if we're making a credit card purchase online, or we are sending other sensitive information to a web server, or if we are logging into a website, or maybe our email account, this is not a good option because HTTP is insecure and our data exchange can easily be intercepted. Instead, we employ HTTPS. This is a secure version of HTTP, and that's going to use SSL or TLS to provide security. And more commonly today, we see TLS used for that. Again, that's a stronger protocol. This works over TCP port 43. A protocol that goes hand in hand with SMTP that we mentioned earlier is POP3. This retrieves email from a server. Remember, SMTP is used to send email to a server, whereas POP3 is one of the protocols for retrieving mail from a server over TCP port 110. POP3 also has a secure version over SSL or TLS, and that uses TCP or UDP port 995. Now, one of the disadvantages of POP3 is that it is going to move email from the server to whatever device you're using. So, for example, if you're reading email on your laptop and you retrieve the email, maybe through an Outlook or Thunderbird email client using POP3, if you open your mobile phone and try to access the same email client, that message is no longer available on the email server because you had previously viewed it on another device. So you won't be able to retrieve this message on the new phone. That's certainly an issue I've run into when trying to use POP3. But IMAP provides a valuable alternative. IMAP allows us to view email on the mail server without removing that email from that server. So essentially, we can have multiple identical instances of our inboxes on various devices. IMAP uses TCP port 143. This is not secure by itself, but we can use that in combination with SSL or TLS. Having the time in our network synchronized is also very important. If we want our logs to correlate to one another, that's critical. That can be communicated using the network time protocol. We can synchronize the clocks on all of the devices in our network so that they are running exactly the same. And that uses UDP port. Next, we have SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol. This is a way that we can monitor or manage or even configure network devices. We use ports 161 and 162 to do that, either TCP or UDP. Another one I'll mention that's actually outside of the well-known port range is our RDP, or Remote Desktop Protocol. You can see that this uses TCP port 3389, so that is within the registered port numbers range. I know that that's outside of the well-known ports, but I can't do without mentioning it since it's a very popular protocol. In fact, it has already been registered as a dedicated port with the IANA. We also have a couple of voice over IP protocols that I'll mention, namely SIP or Session Initiation Protocol and H.323, a protocol designed for the setup, management, and termination of a media session. SIP uses TCP or UDP port 50, 60, and 50 and 61, while H.323 uses TCP port 1720. Both protocols fall within that registered port range. Again, we have SMB or Server Message Block. This is a Microsoft protocol for sharing resources between devices, and that's done over UDP port 445. Originally, this used port 139, but in more recent versions of Windows, it uses port 445. This is one of the most common ports that you would be interested in seeing as a tester. There has been numerous exploits over SMB, one of the most recent and popular being the ransomware WannaCry. This utilized SMB to populate throughout networks. So those are a few of the most commonly used well-known ports and protocols. Again, it's a great idea to commit this to memory in some way so that if those pop up during a pen test evaluation, you have a much better and quicker idea of what you're looking at. I'll reiterate the fact that utilizing flashcards, either normal flashcards or digital flashcards, are a very helpful tool to memorize this list and other things like that. Of course, this is not an extensive list, but these are certainly some of the most common ports and protocols that you are likely to run across in this course.